Alrighty, Gridiron 360 back on it. Dave and Bill, NFL free agency in the NFC West, and we move on to the Los Angeles Rams. The Rams are currently picking number 52. Their first pick is until the second round, and that was due to the trade with Jacksonville during the season to obtain the services of one Jalen Ramsey.
Yep.
They are number 25 out of 32 teams in cap space with $19 million. And based on this free agency list, we have needs being defensive end, running back, offensive lineman, maybe quarterback, linebacker.
Backup quarterback probably.
Yeah,
But you know.
linebacker, and we put a star on kicker. And that is because their man, Legatron, Greg the Leg Zerline, is a free agent. Integral piece to this. You mentioned it earlier. A lot of kickers struggled this year.
Yeah. Overall, the kicking game was one of the worst in history.
I think I don't know if he missed any games to injury, but he had a decent season, as he always does. He is a complete asset to that team, especially with young quarterback Jared Goff and the struggles he's seen. So I start with that because I mean, like, let's see, where is he at? It shows 2.25, 2.25 is what his money is, and I don't see market value. But I mean, you know, kickers could go up a little bit because he's a good one, but probably not too much. I just think that's one that, you know, they'll sign and get on the books and out of the way.
Yep.
So going from there.
I will say this. This is one of the challenges for the Rams. I'm going to use a little bit of analogy. For the Boston Red Sox history, I'm going to switch gears on sports. They owe a lot to the Chicago Cubs. And here's why. Because they had an 86-year World Series drought. You know, obviously the curse of the Babe. And the only reason they didn't get hammered worse for that is because the Cubs were 20 years worse than them. I'm going to say why I use that example is if not for the Atlanta Falcons, I think the Rams would be getting the Dookie Award for this year. For some of they went for it all and it failed miserably on them. And we'll talk about, some of the reasons why, but they've got a cap situation that's pretty significant. And they're only of their top, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, their top 7 players, all above $8.6 million in cap hit. Jared Goff at a $36 million cap hit, and I think we kind of know where that's at. You got a $25 million cap hit from Aaron Donald, though I think we would all agree that that guy's worth that money if anybody is on defense.
For sure.
The only 2 guys that really offer them, or 3 guys that offer them some level of cap relief, is going to be Todd Gurley, and it's minimal. It's about a $5 million savings because they still got about $12 million in dead money. Jalen Ramsey has no dead money and at $13 million, but there's no way they sold the farm for him to not re-sign him.
Right.
Now, I do think they will bring down his cap hit with a long-term deal, but that doesn't mean they're not going to pay him a boatload of money. It just means they'll structure it in a way to clear some space. And then, I mean, potentially you'd have to look at getting rid of Robert Woods at $9 million, and you'd save about $5 million on him. Higbee is a wash, and that's your guys right there. So, and this is a team that's especially on defense. You got to remember they're going to lose Dante Fowler this year. They got Clay Matthews, who's probably a cut guy, did not really live up to the hype that they needed. They were hoping they could squeeze a year or 2 out of him.
Inside linebacker Corey Littleton.
Yeah, I would say
Michael
right now,
Brockers at D tackle, Nickel Roby-Coleman at cornerback, all free agents.
Yeah, and I mean, does this team try to ride Todd Gurley again or try to squeeze some trade value out of him to clear space and kind of go in the draft? That's a tough decision for them because what they can't do is they can't keep going down the road they're going on. They've spent and played for today. And again, we mentioned this with Arizona. They've got a team in San Francisco that's built far better than them right now. So they have to get over that hump to win the division. And then they've got a Seattle team that, even though they've got some challenges coming up this year, they seem to figure out how to stay in contention for the division, which obviously they did up until the very last couple of weeks.
Coaching,
yeah.
Man.
So So for them to get over the hump now, like Arizona, I think their arrow is pointing up, even though they are clearly below the bottom or the top two teams. The Rams have, I think, a fairly hard arrow pointing down because they are in some real serious cap constraints with only $19 million to play with. Now, granted, we talk about these numbers. These numbers are all projected off of this year's. I guess I want to say this off of this year's salary cap, meaning this past year. The projection is somewhere around $10 to $12 million increase. But understand, they got to re-sign guys. They've got to go out and find guys. And the positions...
They got to have room for the guys they draft. They got to have money for that.
Yeah, and the positions that need right now are going to be challenging for them. Unlike Arizona, where there's some of that flexibility and some of those positions are either deep in the draft or deep in free agency, they're not quite in that category. They've got some challenges there. So by all purposes, it looks like Fowler's going to walk. I'm just looking at...
Well, I'm looking at Corey Littleton. He's got just under $3.1 million, and his market value's 15.5, I think.
Yeah.
So I mean, that guy is probably gone. We talk about running back, and it's just a couple years back, that. Or I'm sorry, not 50.5, 12.2 million for Corey Littleton is the market value. Still a hefty increase. We talk about Gurley, and it's only a few years ago that he was, the prize of the league.
Yep.
So that's a big question. You talk about, how Seattle seems to get it done. I said good coaching. I mean, 2 years ago, the Rams were in the Super Bowl, and their head coach, what the heck's his name?
Carroll.
No,
the Rams.
The Rams.
Oh, God, the young guy. Oh, my God.
Why are we brain farting? Anyways, but the point is...
Sean McVay.
The point is teams like Arizona played off of this young coach mentality.
Right.
And because they see, the first year he came in, took him to the Super Bowl, but then all of a sudden things settled down. People figured some things out, and it wasn't as dynamic and exciting and explosive as you thought it might be. So then also that I think goes in suit with these other teams, like Arizona. Jury's not out yet. Cliff Kingsbury, was it a good decision? Is this bringing the young coach, this college type high-powered offense transition to the NFL the right thing? You think it was after seeing what McVay did in year one. And now after year two, you're like, oh, okay, now it's par for the course. I mean? There's a lot there. You say backup quarterback.
Well, they have nobody on.
I understand that, but, we talked about it all year. Maybe they're not who we thought they were, and Goff is the prime candidate. How much longer do you go, especially seeing, the impatience of a lot of teams, and even more so with the position that's most critical on every team at quarterback. How longer do you go? I know the guy made a run to the Super Bowl, but what was that, his second year? And was that due to him? Was that due to the pieces around him and the offense? I just don't know. So, yes, you do need him as a backup quarterback, but are you also looking to, if Goff fails, is this guy, could you have a guy that might be potentially a guy that could take over?
Well, this is how a Rams team turns into this year's Atlanta Falcons is. And think about this. This is why you got a Jameis Winston, a Marcus Mariota, getting looked at and getting moved on from. And this is why you've got a team like Chicago with Trubisky that's already talking about hey, he may not be the starter going into next year. And this guy's still on his rookie deal because they went and re-upped a kid that had some question marks, and then he tanked, and now really his contract is the albatross for this team because you went and said, okay, I got Aaron Donald. Look at the Bears. They went and did and paid Khalil Mack and made him even higher paid than Aaron Donald, not by much, but a little bit. But those are huge cap hits. Now what the Bears are doing is saying, are we going to ride Trubisky and end up here because we did it and we sold our souls to some of these quick fix.
Let's be honest, but most teams, if you're going to use the term you use, the albatross, in terms of the money they command. Yep. In regards to the team, most teams it's going to be the quarterback that has it.
Right, but he set a big number though.
Yeah, the problem then becomes is are they worth their value?
Right, and that's why you've got a team like Dallas questioning the Dak Prescott situation.
Because is he worth what the market is now asking for these guys, which they may not be worth it, but that's what the market holds.
And mind you, the guy right behind him in that draft, Carson Wentz, they're not quite where I think LA feels about Goff, but they're leaning that way. They're starting to go like, is this the guy?
Yeah.
And so, and they have already upped him for big money. So the question becomes,
just wait till we get to the AFC and start talking about Sam Darnold.
Yeah. So you've got these issues, and I think the Rams are in a position where the reset's going to be important. And that's where they're going to have to go.
Yeah. I mean, there's I mean, they've got those other guys. They got the Malcolm Brown behind Gurley, and then they had the other kid that they drafted last year. Maybe they could pick up a running back. I mean, they could draft a running back late. I don't see them going early on that. I really see, based on the money, not a lot to work with. They're going to have to do most of their work in the draft, I think, depending on cuts and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, because you're really only big cut target right now.
They have a lot of defense, man. That's what I'm looking at. On the free agency list, they have a lot of defensive pieces that are up for grabs. And if they're not able to resign them, I don't know if they're able to go out and get somebody better in free agency, because I think it would probably cost them just as much, if not more, than some of the guys they already have.
At one of the.
So then they might be regressing, maybe letting one of the guys go that's good, but getting somebody out there in free agency that's cheaper, but certainly not nearly to the level of play of who they have.
Well, look at it this way: like Fowler is going to go out there and command some of the bigger dollars for a DN right now, or outside linebacker, or DN.
He's on $12 million. His deal, and the market value shows just under 15.
Right. So here's the point, though: is everybody's not terribly excited about the DN market as it is, and the guy that you've got that's potentially either coming off your books or you're re-signing, you're paying him, so you're not getting better re-signing that guy. You're just getting more expensive. Right. So the answer is, if your guy is the top, where do you go from there? And I mean, again, we've talked about in the draft, it's not. They're just not. I mean, especially going in the second round. I mean, we're talking about you're lucky if you see an Epineza fall that low.
The edge rusher is a little bit lacking after first few guys, unless you find somebody that you're able to works well in the system.
And you talked about how they're going to lose that. They're going to lose that middle linebacking core. They're going to lose Littleton likely.
Yep.
So they've got some very, very tough decisions to make. And again, you go back to, like, do they need to go into that quarterback market with the idea that Goff's not the guy? I don't think they can afford to do that. I don't think they can afford to do it. I don't. I think it's going to be a ride or die kind of situation with that guy. And so to my point is, do you go out and try to really push the envelope knowing that you're in a brutal division? You've got a contract you just have to swallow for a little bit. What do you do?
I think this is quite the opposite of Arizona, where they could just, throw, all caution to the wind, and they're going to go sexy with their draft, maybe even free agency. They're just going to, weapons. And I think it's quite the opposite. I think this team just needs to go defense all over the place.
Yeah,
over the place.
You got to get young. I think if I'm them right now, I am thinking, like, number one, I'm thinking about, is there any way I can get Gurley all the way off the books? Meaning, can I make him a trade piece? But I got to be honest with you, with the concern about his health, I think it's a Gurley and a sweetener. So you might be giving up draft capital. You might be doing something. Now, I'm not saying you're giving up a first rounder, but giving up fourth rounders, because I would say if they did that, I don't think running back in the second round, even though I like running back second round this year, I don't think they can do that. No. I think they're more like a fourth round running back.
Yep.
And so
that's the
challenge.
Let's bring this up. I mentioned one of their free agents, Nickel Roby-Coleman, cornerback, 28 years old. He's got 5.2 and a quarter. Right. Doesn't show market value. He has
a club option.
Yes. He is highlighted in red, and instead of UFA for unrestricted free agent, has CO to your point, club option.
And
Talk about that.
which is actually $4.5 million. It basically means the club has the right to retain him at $4.5 million, which is a decrease. So they save, they're going to save $1 million off of last year's cap. The question then, though, you think about it, is he worth it? I think he probably would be. $4.5 million.
Jalen, there.
Yeah.
Then you already have your number one. I mean, Ramsey's number one, but
then
he's a really good corner too.
Well, you remember the whole reason he left Jacksonville is he wanted the big deal. So here's the problem: is he's got one more year left on. He's got no dead money, but you just traded away your first rounder. You can't not resign him. Now they can get creative, but think about this. They can only afford to push money back so long before it swings back around. And they're already feeling that reality in every other position.
Right.
So the whole thing is like, what do you do? Now, here's my thing is I don't think you're going to replace that guy at $4.5 million with better talent.
Right.
So I think the
back.
club option is going to be exercised.
They'll bring him back.
Yeah.
I think so too, because then I think you really have shored up a lot in the secondary. We did put cornerback up there, but that could resolve your cornerback issues for the most part.
I would say their only benefit is because Aaron Donald is so dynamic as a pass rusher from the interior. He almost really, look at his sacks totals are right there with some of the better DNs. So that being said, you don't have to have certainly pass rush always helps the secondary, but it also helps you not have to go nuts on the outside like you think you have to.
Right.
But you got to be able to set the edge, and you certainly have to be able to stop the run. And if you go weak on that, you're going to be in trouble. So I guess my point is this team has to decide, do we go for a bit of a retooling now and take our medicine now? Or do we continue to go for it all with the idea that we're going to be running really tight for a few years, and when you start doing that you run into depth issues.
I think that they're two. This will be 2 years removed. The season 2 years removed from competing in the Super Bowl. I think that they're like we saw the Falcons. They were trying to get themselves back the following year, or even the year at this past. The thought process, they've got enough. They can get back there, and I think that's the Rams' mentality. Like they've got to get back there this year.
Yeah, and I think they were a victim of some bad luck with some injuries, and certainly Gurley being the biggest one. But now they've got a quarterback nightmare, and so. And I've gone over this, and we talked about it where Goff is at. If you look at Goff, I still go back to the year before last. I even said it was the Detroit game before the Chicago game where I think he threw 5 picks against Chicago. He had a really rough game against Detroit. And if you look at his stats, he's had some, 100-plus quarterback ratings after that in some good games, mostly at home. But he has had some absolute destructive games. And when it got put on his shoulders this year with, Gurley kind of just not being altogether right, or at least the perception of that, because it was hard to figure out what the hell they were doing because they didn't play him at all in the beginning. And then they started playing him and he played well, but then he went back to getting limited snaps. You just don't know how truthful they've been with his injuries. I think this is one of my teams that I would say is in the midst of a nightmare, and they better make a definitive situation. I don't think floating along and trying to compete is to their benefit. They've got too much. They've done too much to push themselves to the forefront of now, that they either have to decide that we blew now and we're going to try to retool for as quick a turnaround as we can, maybe a couple years. I don't necessarily think McVay is the problem with this. Because I do think his offense and his offensive style has shown it can work, but you have to have the guy to execute it. And I think we found that when the lights really came on for Goff, he wasn't able to step up to the mic.
You don't know, man. I'm telling you, the Jacob Eason, he's out there, and he might be a guy that fits it. They might try to grab him early because it's the second round. I think, I could see them trying to move up late in the first round to get somebody, trying to make some moves.
But again, I think you're killing draft capital.
I know that, but again, if you're going with the mentality that you got to try to get back there now, then that's it. I just it's a conundrum, man. This one could be a little bit, I don't think it'll be that exciting of a draft for them in terms of who they draft. Like I said, that sexy player, but it's going to be total need, man. I don't think they can. I wonder if they can go best player on the board.
Yeah,
Or
I don't
if
know.
they have to just, I mean, especially in the second round, you might just have to pick need.
Well, if I was them, here's what I do, and this is something I've seen out of some other teams, and this can be very, very, very critical, and if done well, can make a huge difference. The trading back in the first round has become much more difficult. It just has. The fear of quarterbacks, which used to be the big trade up, the lack of first round running backs. We're talking about major skill positions, receivers. People are very wary of trading up for. Usually, if I see trading up, it's been more in the line of maybe a little bit of O line and certainly defense. But here's the thing: I would say, I would start considering trading back, like. If I had an opportunity, because you see a lot of this, trading back in the second round where I get somebody's third, fourth, whatever, where you start stacking your third, fourth, and fifth round picks with the idea that you can find, because one of the big things that has started to happen, and it's been pretty impressive over the last, I'd say 8 or 9 years, is that ability to go into those small schools. Are you good with the small schools and finding those hidden gems that turn out to be excellent players? You look at guys like, I remember Peanut Tillman for the Bears. Tariq Cohen was a nobody at his school, and he was a fourth rounder. And while he didn't have a great year, can you find those guys that can kind of piece together a team while you're starting to do that? And so what I would say is I would try to grab as much draft capital later in those rounds so you can fill out your roster. And again, maybe it's the linebacker where you find it. Maybe you find a good player in the fourth round. Maybe you find a decent O-lineman in round 3 or 4. That's the thing. I think if I was them, that's the way I'd be looking. I think if they trade up into the first round, they are going to increase this pressure of how am I going to deal with all this money, because they're going to trade up into more money, which they already don't have. I mean, we're talking about $19 million is not a lot for a team with the needs they got.
Right. So, for instance, I'm looking at a top 100 draft board, and they have at number 70 currently listed, and this is actually off of the San Diego Union Tribune site. Number 70, Akeem Davis Gaither, linebacker, who is a senior, so played all his years from App State.
Look, those are the kind of guys you got to find.
Right.
Now, here's the whole thing with that, though, is you find teams usually are on, because, it takes a lot to scout 1A. I call it 1A because it's not 1A anymore. It's
right.
FBS. So you generally take 4 or 5 colleges, if you see with these smaller schools, that you believe you have a relationship with the coaching staff and you've created some trust there at the college level, where you say, come on, tell me, do you got a guy that's a gold mine? That's just doesn't get the pub, meaning you can't go scout all 100+ teams that are in that FCS. Right. So that's the challenge with that, is because you can't be that wide, where you've got to have relationships with schools, you've got to have trust with coaches, you got to have an in with them to help them uncover these players. But that's how they can turn this around. But again, that is tough. It's not like I say it and it can just be done. I don't care how many resources you have. It's just not that easy, because then you have the issue of, okay, does this guy dominate because competition, or does this guy dominate because he's elite?
Right.
And that's why you see it. So I think that's where
you don't find Khalil Max like that very often.
Yeah, well, because then you got to get the guy like a Khalil Mack that grew into himself late in his college career, and let's not kid ourselves. Khalil Mack went number 5, so everybody knew about him, too.
And he went to Buffalo.
Yeah, he's not. He was a.
So you talk about there's always you just said it. Is it the competition? Is that why he's dominating? And that's a big question mark. And obviously it paid off.
And he wasn't a hidden gem to the NFL. He was a hidden gem to Buffalo.
Yes.
So because he got found, and that is. That's not where they're going to make their hay on this. I look at this as a very tough situation. They have to re-up Jalen, or this is all for nothing, because I'm going to tell you right now, if they don't give him the contract that sent him out of Jacksonville, I don't know that you're going to be able to retain him, because you start franchising him. If there's one thing I know about Jalen makes his feelings known.
Well, and that's the thing. Even if you don't franchise him, or if there's a struggle coming to terms with contract, now you've got a whole other mess of issues, because now he's going to be vocal about it, and then it's going to be all the talk. Instead of focusing on the task at hand and getting better, it's going to be a distraction.
Yeah. Now let me say this: Jalen always played hard for Jacksonville, but you remember when he kind of said, "I'm done with this."
Oh,
the injury
checked out.
came in. The injury came up, and it was like,
Or
"Oh, my ankle
was
or my
there
hip."
one?
Right. So the idea is, I think he's worth it, but all he wants to do is be paid like he's one of the best corners in the NFL. And you know what? You're nuts if you don't think he is. But at the same time, he's not going to go quietly. He's not.
No.
He's not that guy. So you've got all these things going on. And I just think it's a recipe for some ugliness there. But if I'm them, I'm collecting draft capital, and you're gonna have to. I think they're gonna have to scrape the outer edges of the free agent market in these areas we talked about.
Okay. All right. I like it. All right. We're gonna stop the Rams there, and we will continue next with the Seattle Seahawks.